welcome to the Open Justice podcast. I'm Stacey Haigh. I'm a second year law student at the Open University and the current Open Justice Centre intern. I'm delighted to welcome you to the very first episode of the series. In this episode, I've had the pleasure of speaking with Stephen Sutherland, who is a fifth year Open University law student and also works with Victim Support Scotland. Stephen sharing his experiences of balancing work and study and reflects on the projects that first sparked his passion for creating change and supporting others. We really hope that you find this an interesting and inspiring conversation. How are you doing, Stephen?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Oh, God. All the way from Scotland?
All the way from Scotland, yeah.
Is it sunny up there?
Bizarrely, yes.
Yeah.
Still got my 50 with me.
Yeah. Extended summer this year.
Yeah, it really is. Starting early.
So, yeah, we're going to have a chat about these fantastic things that you've done so far. I'm sure there's plenty more to come. You're studying law at the minute, aren't you?
I am, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm on my 5th year out of 6, so still feels a long way away, but getting there.
So, living in Scotland.
Yeah.
How are you getting around the difference between Scottish law, English law? Are you learning them both?
I am learning them both, yeah. I learn English law, of course, through the Open University, through all my studies over the last 5 years, and of course my final year. And I do get a fairly reasonable amount of knowledge as well through my job, which is working with Victim Support Scotland.
How did you get into law in the first place then?
I think for me it was always the area that I wanted to go into, other than sort of more recently politics. And when I was a youngster, had it not been for the poor eyesight that I suffered from, I would have been a pilot.
From pilot to
the law. I don't know if that's a step up or a step down. Somebody can make that determination for themselves. But for me, it was always wanting to be a pilot when I was a youngster. But unfortunately, as I say, for health reasons, that was ruled out before I even was able to contemplate such a decision. And I always just remember being at school and thinking the only career I ever wanted to do was be a lawyer. But having poor education at the time and not having the greatest encouragement, I didn't know if that would be possible. It certainly didn't feel like that at the time. I was still set on becoming a lawyer. Therefore, I decided to go back and do some study, and that's when I became a student with the Open University. There is a massive scope of opportunity through the Open University. Having come out of school with very little qualifications is always a really nice modern development in the education system that can really help people, because ultimately I don't believe that a person's future should be defined as to how their brain is at the age of 16.
Yeah.
I just think that's bonkers.
You've used that in the past as well for helping others.
Yeah. My idea for that was to try and support people with visual impairment when it comes to interviews for jobs.
So this is before you started your degree?
This is before I started my degree. Ultimately, I wanted to try and support people to go into job interviews feeling as though they're on a level playing field to the able-bodied person, shall we say, whereby they can actually feel confident in speaking to an employer. Because having little or no eyesight makes basic communication more difficult. It's probably a well-known fact now that most communication is non-verbal, and when you live with little or no sight, you don't have the same social interaction, you don't have the same social cues, and therefore that makes the basic communication a little bit more tricky. Confidence levels are often less than what they could be if you're in a position of sight impairment, or you have a hearing impairment or any other disability that can be debilitating to that extent. So I just wanted to be able to help a cohort of people build confidence in the hope that they can gain future employment.
Had you been for job interviews yourself?
I had done, not many.
Okay.
I'll add, which kind of compounds the felony here. It's the fact that there's not a lot of opportunity for people with disabilities to do jobs that are ones in which they can climb the ladder in the career, shall we say, and
Yeah.
really fulfil an element of enjoyment. Because a job shouldn't purely be about earning money to keep yourself afloat in life. The job or career should be about something that gives you a sense of achievement and fulfillment. It's something you can enjoy going to. Again, it's like, the work to live, not live to work,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And ultimately, I do feel in the UK that we do live to
In the sunshine.
That's right, or sitting in the Gold Coast over in Australia or something, or I don't know, Palm Beach in America, somewhere where you get constant sun.
Yeah.
Whereas, although we've got sun right now,
Yeah.
that's certainly a
We're
rarity.
still sitting working.
We're still sitting.
So, but yeah, speaking of America,
Mhm.
when did you go over there as...
Well, firstly, it's a good segue.
Yeah.
And 2017 was the year I went over to America, and I believe I was 23 or thereabouts. And it was through, sadly, the death of an MP, Jo Cox, who was murdered in the year before, in 2016. She did a lot of work with the US, and the US decided, in honour of her life, to do a social cohesion young leadership programme, whereby they would allow for 20 young people in the UK to go across to America and do social cohesion type work that would basically enable us to integrate with a variety of different areas of US society in the East Coast. Work it involved, for example, meeting organisations that would support with disability or homelessness or education or mental health or American gun control, a whole lot of political issues that were obviously very high on the agenda at the time. And we got to learn about a variety of different views from America or from people in America, and get to share my own experience of living in the UK with, for example, a disability, or share my views on gun crime, for example, or poverty, or the education system, their health system, our health system. So the whole range of stuff that we spoke of, and a whole range of people we got to meet. We also did a little bit of work in America planning for a project that we would do when we come back. And in addition to planning that project, we were asked to compete against one another. So myself and the 19 others that were in America, we were all asked to go to London about a week after coming back from America and participate in a grant writing training course that took over the course of a day. I come back to Glasgow, wrote out my application. About a month or so later, I was informed that it was myself that won the grant. Yeah, I mean, I was, believe it or not, astounded at the time to have found out that I was selected, especially having had doubts at the beginning as to whether or not I would even apply.
Yeah.
Although I was encouraged by a mentor at the Scottish Youth Parliament.
Well, that's what I was just going to ask, is where did you get your confidence from for making that application and going through the process? And then
I really don't know. In truth, I think I just kind of had it in my mind that I guess didn't have anything to lose, or just went, you know what, submit the thing, see what happens. If it goes anywhere, great. If it doesn't, you've at least tried.
Yeah.
And I submitted it. Didn't really think much of it.
What was involved in that application? Was that?
It was very short.
Was it?
It was exceptionally short, and actually that made it quite difficult. And it was after the written application, which, as I say, wasn't huge at all. They asked that each of us do a 3-minute video conference.
Okay, yeah.
Explain.
I was wondering if there was like an interview stage to it.
That's what it was. So there was a 3-minute interview whereby we would speak to one of the hosts from an organisation called Legacy International.
Yeah.
And about a week later after that, I got an email, which I actually still think I've got on my phone even now.
Yeah.
I've got a place.
Yeah.
It's now right, I've been selected. I'm going to America. I've got a couple of months to prepare. I've never been to America. I hadn't travelled on my own. Again, having a disability of limited eyesight makes travelling a bit of a frightening prospect.
Yeah.
I remember the night before, I had my case packed, and it was a fairly large case for my time there, and it was crammed full of stuff. Of course, I try and zip it up now after all that hard work of going through interviews and whatnot.
It was the suitcase that let you down.
Exactly, my own packing inability has led me to a problem where I've not even left the house. Once that particular project was finished, it was then when I come back, I decided, well, not so much decided, but I was asked to do a project of my own, which then was the reason for the public speaking project. That's why I wanted to do the public speaking. I thought it would be a nice way to try and support a vulnerable group. And it was my experience in America that kind of drove me to doing that. I got $3,000 of US state funding, which I think was the equivalent of about £2,600 at the time, which funded the public speaking project and also funded a final event in the Scottish Parliament where some of the participants in the project, in the training, went to the Scottish Parliament and delivered a speech in front of friends and family, organisation heads and MSPs, so the equivalent of an MP in Scotland, a member of the Scottish Parliament, and also the presiding officer of the Scottish Parliament hosted the project. That's equivalent to the Speaker of the House, and it was a really good success as well. So I think there was a great cohesion between all the organisations that we worked with at the time.
When you're in the courts, how do you adapt for disabilities? Are there any specific areas?
Yeah, it's not as difficult as what it might sound, and in fact, it's actually extremely straightforward. So the public speaking organisation that I was part of at the time, and indeed the Association of Public Speaking, would use a traffic light system, which is very self-explanatory. So that's all very well and good when you have the visual ability to actually see and recognise and acknowledge that particular system. However, it's not effective if you've got colour blindness or if you're completely sight impaired, i.e. have no eyesight of any kind. So of course, naturally, you need to find an alternative. And the way that we adapted it was to use a simple yet effective method of just using a small bell. A small bell that you might find on the counter of a shop, for example, that you would ding. And what we would do is we would ding the bell at sort of maybe the last 3 minutes of the speech. So if it's an 8-minute speech, then you would do it sort of 3 minutes prior to that 8. And then you would do another 2 dings, for example, maybe in the final minute. And then that would allow the person who would know the system, they would get to the end of their speech and getting close to that 8 minutes section. And then, of course, if they're over time, they would ding it 3 times, and again, that's the equivalent of the light going off, telling you wished. So it was a very effective way of doing it. Obviously, if you're deaf-blind, it becomes a little bit more challenging. So there then has to be a different type of mechanism, and I guess sort of maybe using a sort of vibration type method would be one of sort of similar approach you could use.
Of course, yeah.
So you could use that as well. So again, it's just about finding ways that are similar but different, but nothing, that's going to win you a Nobel Prize. They're quite straightforward. So yeah.
Is there any little other things that you come across in the courts when you're working?
Like anywhere, most places are simply not built, especially courts, to accommodate for accessibility. The courts in Scotland that I've worked in are typically of an old-fashioned type style of building. Presumably, many of the courts, maybe not all, but certainly many in England will be of similar fashion, where they're old buildings. They're not easy to adapt, and therefore accessible room within a room can be a challenge. So there is that element of it. So if someone has a wheelchair or they've got a disabled buggy, for example, it can be really difficult. So there's that big hurdle that I don't believe there's going to be a one-size-fits-all type solution to. I recognise that from an advocacy perspective, so me being a student would obviously want to go into a position in the future of becoming an advocate, whether that be a solicitor advocate in Scotland or whether it be a barrister in England. Of course, you would be doing public speaking, albeit within the setting of a court. So therefore, you would need to find the ability to present a speech in a way that isn't going to be tied to a screen because of course he would need to interact with a jury most often than not. So when you're interacting with a jury, you don't want to be tied to paper or an iPad, reading through notes, and you don't want to be reading as almost like it's a book. You want to be able to project in the way you see lawyers do on, I don't know, Suits, for example, an American TV program, and they're addressing the jury and they're confident and they're telling a story, they're giving the evidence, they're summarising the facts and whatnot. And you want to be able to project in a way that's really convincing, and ultimately that's a huge part of being a lawyer. Is in the courtroom you need to be convincing, and you're not going to be convincing if you're tied to notes and telling a story through reading word for word of a document. So ultimately you need to be able to find a way as a person with a disability, specifically sight impaired, to be able to redo that. And ultimately, having maybe an earpiece in, for example, having little some bullet points being read into your ear could help with that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, technology and the advancements in technology that. So how open are the courts to having technology in there? I know that they're quite strict with things, but I guess they're going to have to be at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously,
absolutely.
I think it'd be a bit different if you're an advocate there trying to do your job and present information as opposed to a member of the public sitting at the back with a phone. You can obviously see there's a distinction there to be made, but ultimately, certainly in my experience in Scotland, and I would expect England being the same, would be that if you have a particular physical challenge that makes traditional presentations difficult, then I can't see why they wouldn't allow for adaptations. And you could argue reasonable adjustments. So I would certainly say that my experience, I certainly haven't seen any barriers.
I bet you sort of hit your degree knowing a fair bit.
I guess I did, yeah. Having said that though, I kind of wish I did the degree a bit earlier.
Okay.
Just purely because I now know the length of time that it's going to take to get to where I hope to be, and ultimately doing the Scottish route just adds more time.
Okay.
I guess the experience I had was the catalyst for getting more grounded and going back to doing the study and having the confidence to do the study. Prior to the US trip, prior to the public speaking, prior to going to South Africa, I just don't see myself having gone back to the uni.
You mentioned South Africa. What did you do out there then?
So South Africa was another brain scheme of mine.
Did you just sit and apply for all these random things?
Well, funnily enough, the South African one I didn't even need to apply for because I just created it.
Yeah.
It wasn't even so much as an application. It was more I wanted to go abroad into Africa. I didn't know specifically where when I first came up with this particular plan. I didn't even think this plan would even work. It was just an idea that I had in my mind. However, I seen that there was an opportunity in Durban, South Africa. And I spoke with the RNIB again, and I said that I was planning to go over. Is there anything that I can perhaps do that they can incorporate their organisation into this plan? And one day I was in the RNIB offices and I noticed that they were basically going to just dispose of a load of older equipment that they were not going to use because they have newer, better versions of that same equipment. I can take that with me. Why just destroy it? Why take it to wherever it was going to go to be, destroyed? It's still useful. It's still decent equipment. So as part of my project over in South Africa, I decided to take as much as I could with me and distribute this older technology to schools that would specifically accommodate those with disabilities, and again, specifically those who had sight impairment. And I remember going into the main school that I was aiming to supply the equipment to. They had no knowledge of me bringing this equipment. They knew I was coming, but they didn't realise I had the equipment I was bringing with them. And I remember the sheer shock of the teacher thinking that I was trying to sell them the equipment. This is all great, this is brilliant, and whatever. And she was ecstatic that the little ones were drawn to it, and you could clearly see it was making a big difference.
Yeah.
But she said, we can't afford to buy any of this. And then sheer shock when I turned around and says, "No, I'm giving it to you."
Yeah.
You know, she's like, "What?" You know, like she couldn't quite believe that I brought this stuff, 5,000 miles or whatever it is, just to give. And so yeah, they were elated that I could bring this technology over to them, albeit very basic, and it made a pretty good difference. And it wasn't just about the technology; there was other things I did there as well, and some more practical support whilst I was there also. But you know, the main feature for me was to provide this technology.
Yeah.
But that was just a random, you know, thought that I had in my head at one point. And again, I had to get the organisation, the RNIB, behind that particular project. And again, fortunately, they believed that I could do it, even though I wasn't entirely sure. And I just basically just went from one day to the next, and it just grew and grew and grew, and eventually it became to what it ended up to be, and I was pretty pleased with it.
So at the minute, have you got anything, you know, any more sort of light bulb moments that have happened recently that even stuff that, you know, that you'd like to do? Is there anything at the minute, or are you concentrating on your studies and obviously work with the victim support?
As I kind of mentioned earlier, I think you kind of have to then focus on a long-term scope as well as, you know, when I was younger, I had the flexibility to go and do these nifty projects that, you know, when you're young, you can do things a bit more freely. Obviously, when you're older, you know, adult life kicks in, and that's never a nice thing.
Bills to pay.
Bills to pay, yeah, work to do, and all that nonsense. So I don't know if I'll be doing anything of that extravagance anytime soon. However, I have had the idea a couple of times of going over and trying to sit in some US courts and listening to some trials in America. Whether that takes place, I don't know, but I think for the time being, it's mostly get the degree, determine whether I stick with the English system, which, as I say, has its pros and cons, or change and stick with the Scottish system, which, from a practical sense, makes better sense. So I think it really is a case of just getting the career off the ground now, and acknowledge that that was a good time in my life that was really successful. But I'm in a different era now. I need to go and make basically a life for myself, a career, and ultimately try and actually do something with the work that I'm putting into the Open University and make it count for something. So ultimately it is more of a grounded position, and maybe the gallivanting will start maybe in a few years' time if I've created something that I can actually call a career before I get to my retirement age, which is, you know, it remains to be seen which will come first.
Well, we'll definitely be looking out for you. I will, definitely. And can't thank you enough for coming all this way and having a chat with me.
No, it's not a problem.
It's brilliant.
It's a relief to get out there. Thank you.